Welcome to True Crime and Wine. If you're new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am Sherrilyn, and I am so glad you found me. We are getting right into it today. Before we do, though, as always, I have a quick message for you. I want to give a huge thank you to our sponsor today, Fume, not only for the support on my channel, but the support my device has given me during some very testing moments the last few weeks specifically. If you've been here for a while, you know that I've been trying to break some bad habits in my life and really leaned on my Fume during a vacation that we had this summer. Now, if you're new to the channel and you've never heard of Fume, Fume is an innovative award-nominated device that helps with what can be a really stressful transition of breaking bad habits into a much more enjoyable and attainable process. Instead of electronics, Fume is completely natural. Instead of vapor, Fume uses flavored air, and instead of harmful chemicals, Fume uses all delicious flavors. I think the last time we were talking about the cores, I was rocking the raspberry lemon. I have really gravitated to the orange vanilla though. It's given creamsicle vibe that I was not expecting. And I think I mentioned last time too, something that surprised me so much was the amount of flavor that you just get like from the air, which is so helpful because I think that's really what I thought I would miss. Now, when I was first using the Fume last time we spoke, I loved the fact that I had something to distract me while traveling, but I'm always going to keep it 100% transparent with you. At that point in my journey, I was just like not really ready to fully be done. I still made like exceptions and excuses. You know, I'd be like, oh, only when I have some wine, or only on evenings, or on the weekends, or with friends. But recently I have made some, strict health goals, and part of those is that I'm going to be fully done with my bad habit by October, and that means even socially. And I really can't tell you how much of a difference it has made to have Fume to really help just break down my habit day by day. Redirecting and implementing a change, it just doesn't happen overnight, so please don't be hard on yourself if you're in a similar position and you're on a journey that isn't just really happening as quickly or easily as you want it to. For me personally, I needed to tell the people in my life what I was doing, not only to hold myself accountable, but also to have their support and understanding on really hard days. I think one of my favorite parts about the Fume is it comes with this adjustable airflow dial, so not only are you able to control like the amount of air that you're intaking, but it also has like a magnetic component to it. So if you're fidgeting or just kind of like feeling like you need to distract yourself and have your fingers doing something that feels really cool, it's a very neat de-stressing anti-anxiety component to like the whole breaking your habit thing. And I think that's one of the things that surprised me the most is once I've kind of broken the habit of like bringing something to my mouth. Like I love having the fidget aspect to it. Fume has over 100,000 customers and thousands of success stories, so there is no reason that you can't be one too. You can join me and Fume by accelerating humanity's breakup with destructive habits by picking up your journey pack today. Just head to tryfume.com/SherrilynDale or scan the QR code and use code SherrilynDale to get 10% off when you get the journey pack today. That's tryfum.com and use code SherrilynDale to save an additional 10% off of your order today. All right, today we are talking about the case of a beautiful 16-year-old small town loving girl named Britney Ujlaky, whose life ended so tragically by just unfathomable betrayal. Before we dive into the heaviness of today, let's do a little grounding and do today's riddle. Now I'm trusting you on this one. You have to let me know if you got this instantly or if it tricked you. All right, first think of the color of the clouds. Next, think of the color of snow. Now, think of the color of a bright, full moon. Now answer quickly, what do cows drink? Today we are headed to Spring Creek. Nestled on the outskirts of Elko, Nevada, you will find Spring Creek, which is a small and beautiful town. It's about a 15-minute drive to Ruby Mountains and home to families who come from generations of ranchers and miners. Mining is a staple of the economy in the area, and it's what attracted the Ujlaky family to move there from Colorado Springs in August 2010. Jim Ujlaky, his wife Alicia, son James, and daughter Britney, they made the move there so that Jim could provide for his family as a gold miner. And they all seemed to really enjoy it. The kids especially thought it was a really fun place to live. Britney loved riding horses, ranching, going to the rodeos, riding ATVs. And she and her brother were also basically like live-in best friends. Britney was only a year and a few months older than James, so they grew up very, very close. I think it actually would be fair to say that the entire family was pretty tight-knit. Even when their parents had decided to separate, their mom moved out, but she lived close by so that they could keep a close relationship and continue raising the children together, so that they didn't really feel like as much disruption of the family. Because that can be a really hard time. I love to hear when parents are able to do that. It's really not an easy thing to do at all, but it truly is the best thing, the most selfless thing that you can do for your kids. I do want to add an exception here. This is not just with every relationship, though. Obviously, this does not include like abusive relationships, but you know what I mean. But I think it's because of those values that Britney grew up very strong. She had high morals. She was quite independent. She loved to just ride off on her horse into the field for hours and do her own thing. And at 16, she had a really mature, strong sense of responsibility and what it was like to work hard. She was happiest doing daily chores at a local ranch that she helped out with, and Britney was described as the one who was always the first one in the saddle to round up the livestock, and she definitely had a talent. She probably could have, made a really big name and career for herself in some sort of like sporting arena, but that's just kind of where she was the happiest, just helping out, doing things, and just like being one with the animals. That being said, she also was, in some way, a typical teenage girl who loved experimenting with makeup. She loved to pick flowers to cheer people up, and there's a quote that a friend of hers said. Britney used to tell her, no matter how bad of a day you're having, a flower will always make you feel better. And that's the motto she lived by, the vibe she gave off. She wanted people to be happy, tried really hard to make her friends laugh. Those who knew her said she brought out the best in people. She was fun, silly, bubbly, and just really made people feel like they could be themselves around her without any sort of judgment. Her plan after graduating from Spring Creek High School was to join the Navy and also study counseling so that she could help people in the military who suffered from mental health issues, which, if you've been on this channel for a really long time, you know is really important to me, and a lot of my Sippendales were very open about mental health challenges. So hearing that was, a priority of Britney's that she wanted to take on in her future really touched me. And no doubt just learning about her the past few weeks here, I have no doubt that she would have had a very bright future ahead of her. All she had to do was get through the last couple years of adolescence, and in 2020, unfortunately, she was experiencing some bullying and had switched to homeschooling. Her best friend from childhood had said there was just something about that year where everyone was being really mean to her and just like turned on her, and she was going through a really rough time. I kind of look at it as jealousy, which sucks. Like, so much of bullying is rooted from that, and I'm sure they saw somebody who was shining and just tried to dim her glow. Now, she did have a pretty solid group of friends that she would open up to, spend time with. She also liked to spend a lot of her time at the rodeo, where she would meet other people with common interests. And one of those people was a guy named Bryce Dickey. He was a couple years older than her and just someone that she looked at as an older brother type. And that's how she would refer to him. She would talk about him as like my big bro. He was in a relationship for over 2 years, so this was strictly platonic, and probably why she felt more comfortable with him. And her parents also, they were cool with them hanging out. He was like the shy cowboy who always made sure that she was home on time, and he kept an eye on her. His friends say that he was a very compassionate person and the type of guy who would give the shirt off of his back to anybody who needed it. So on Sunday, March 8th, when Britney and Bryce met up to hang out together, there's nothing unusual about that. Now, earlier that afternoon, Britney's dad had a band practice for his like classic heavy metal band, and Britney had decided that she wanted to tag along and go with him. She and her dad were extremely close. Her family used to call her his mini-me. He even said he had to admit like how freaky it was that they were just like so alike. Anything that he liked in life, like she also just had that same common interest. It reminded me a lot of my girls with their dads. So she went with her dad, hung out with the band while they practiced for a while. She was cheering them on. She was also lightheartedly kind of teasing them, making them laugh. And during practice, she's also Snapchatting, which is when she's talking to her friend Bryce, and she invites him to also come along and hang out with her too. He does, and before practice is over, Britney tells her dad that the two of them are going to hang out for a little bit, and then Bryce was going to drop her off at home. He says, cool. They say their I love you goodbyes, and she said, I'm going to beat you home. So at 7:30, when Jim gets back from band practice, he's expecting Britney to be there and becomes worried when he's kind of walking around the house calling for her and she is not home. He calls her cell and it goes straight to voicemail. It's immediately concerning to him because her phone is never off. But he calls his ex-wife, Britney's mom, just to see if maybe she went over there and forgot to check in and let him know, but she also had not heard from Britney. So she tries calling her cell phone as well, and same thing. It goes to voicemail, and she just gets this sinking feeling in her gut because her phone is never turned off. She's very responsible. And if for whatever reason it had died, she would have been in contact to be like, hey, my phone died. I'm on my way, or I'm going to be out for a little bit, but you can reach me at whoever's number she's with. They ask her brother if he had heard from her, and he says no, but his initial thought was, okay, well, maybe, there were people who were hanging out. She went to hang out. There was some like drinking or something going on. Maybe she got a little bit tipsy, didn't want to get in trouble, and was just laying low. So their mom just says, well, call Bryce and see what's going on, regardless of what the situation is. Like, we just want to make sure she's okay. So he texts Bryce asking where Britney is, and he gets a reply back, and Bryce said, I dropped her off at the high school. And James is like, with who? So Bryce said he didn't know him. He didn't really get a great look at him because he was just dropping Britney off, but he was a white guy who was tall and had this like cowboy look to him. So when he hears that Britney's not home, he's concerned. He messages her brother back, and he said he's rounding up their friends to get a search party together. And he's like, I feel so sorry. Like, I feel really guilty. I should have just dropped her off at home. But Britney said, like, not worrying about getting me back because she was going to tell her dad that he could just pick her up from the school later. And he also said that this guy had a truck. So he figured, okay, well, even if there's a change of plans and she wants to meet up or meet her dad back at home later, this guy can drive her home. So James is like, okay, well, what kind of truck is it? And he described it as like an ugly green Ford F-150 older model. So now panic starts to even intensify further because no one in her family or close friend group knew who this guy was or who drove this truck. And they stay up all night just calling around, trying to find her. And one of Britney's friends did mention that Britney had told her that she had been talking to a guy that she did recently meet, and his name was JT from what she knew. She didn't know his last name, didn't know what he drove or anything like that, but just knew that Britney was interested in a guy named JT. They decide at this time that this isn't just some innocent explanation that her phone died and she forgot to check in. They decide to call the sheriff and file a missing persons report. And so a deputy comes out and meets with Britney's family. Her family also shuts down the assumption that this is just a teenage girl, acting rebellious. This is extremely out of character for her. She was always a really good communicator and extremely responsible. So their concerns were taken pretty seriously right away. When deputies find out that she was last seen at Spring Creek High School when Bryce had dropped her off and that she was possibly with a guy named JT, they reach out to Bryce and ask him to meet them at the high school so they can kind of go through the steps on the ground and just see how everything was laid out. Bryce meets them at the school, goes through everything. He says that when they met up with each other, they didn't really have a plan. Like most times that they hung out, they just decided they were just going to drive around Spring Creek for a couple hours. And he said as they were driving, he got a call from his dad asking him to come back home. So he tells Britney he needs to go home, and she asked if he could just drop her off at the high school and that she was going to meet up with a new friend. He said he couldn't be certain if his name was JT. He didn't ask about it. He wished that he did. He said that they arrived at the school. He saw this tall fella who looked like a cowboy with a cowboy hat in a green truck. He said last he saw Britney, she was walking over to the truck and they were just talking. So he was not sure if she even really got into the vehicle, because at that point he drove off and got back home. Unfortunately, he also wasn't able to get a license plate number, so the police go to the public asking for help from the local residents. This is kind of an area where there's got to be somebody who could recognize something that they hear as being like, oh, okay, that's, so-and-so's son. In the meantime, they also asked Britney's cell phone provider to do a ping search on her phone to try and find her last location. Now, the cell phone provider was able to tell that her cell phone was pinging on Boyd Kennedy Road, which is about 5 miles east of the high school. So that's kind of where they direct a search. But this is like a lot of rural land to cover, not an easy task at all. Britney's friends and family are also all trying to do anything that they can to find her. They're driving up and down extremely long stretches of road. They, I think, posted over 500 flyers in the surrounding towns as well, set up a search page on Facebook. And then Britney's mom gets a text. It's from a number that she doesn't know, and it says, I have your daughter. If you don't send me $25,000, I'm going to feed her to my dog. Now, if that's not stomach sinking enough, another message comes through and says, I'm being nice enough. I don't want to hurt your daughter, but I'm a fugitive, a human trafficker, a drug trafficker, and it won't be good if I ask my dogs to grape her. So just do what I say. They also tell Britney's mom, Alicia, that they have already given her drugs. She's not doing well. She's very sick. It's getting worse, and that if she doesn't act fast, she's probably gonna die. She immediately calls the police. They just say, okay, stop messaging this person, come to the station so that we can try to trace where the messages are coming from. She goes to the police, and while they are trying to go through the messages, trying to pull data, the lieutenant gets a call. It's from a search party of locals that were out looking for Britney and came across a heartbreaking discovery. While they were driving, combing an area called Burner Basin, which was about 18 miles outside of town, they spot what they thought looked like a very large amount of blood on the side of the road. They get out to look. It's quite dark, so it had been there for a little bit. And a few feet away from this area, they see off into the brush this blue tarp, which looks to have a body underneath it. So while the station is getting this call and forensics is being called to secure the scene, the detectives are being notified as to what's going on. Britney's mom is at the station trying to figure out where these ransom messages are coming from. She's in an interview room, which is being recorded, and one of the detectives comes into the room and says, we need to leave. We have to go to the scene of where a body has just been found. Without knowing if it was Britney or not, she just felt like this mother's intuition that it was her daughter, and she just breaks down. I've seen the video of that interrogation room, or interview room, I'd like to call it, because she's not being interrogated, she was being interviewed at this time. The recording of that moment being captured, it just like, it shattered me. Absolutely gut-wrenching, like hearing the sounds and the screams and the cries come from Britney's mother. And sadly, she was right. Her maternal intuition was correct. The person under that tarp was her daughter, Britney Ujlaky. Now, prior to anything being confirmed, the entire scene was pretty telling. There was a keychain found close by that was Britney's and said her name, Britney, on it. And there were pretty visible indications that she had been SA'd. Her pants and her underwear were pulled around her ankles, and she also had a severe puncture wound to her neck. Near the body, there was also a condom wrapper that was found, and as they were searching around that area, there were earbuds or earphones. I want to say earbuds, but they were like actually on a string hanging off of a bush, which caught their attention. And then when they went to go look at the earphones, they look behind the bush and they see a used condom. This realization was just devastating for everybody in the community. When you hear about something like this, especially in kind of like a smaller town setting, I think everybody kind of takes that individual on as like their loved one. This could be my little sister, or there's probably a connection that like she's friends with my little sister, and everybody's just like hoping for like just a very innocent explanation. And one of the biggest ways that words were traveling was on social media. Even Bryce, her friend who dropped her off, posted saying, "Yesterday we all received the news that made us hit the floor. Around 8 in the morning, we all started meeting up at my house to grieve and to mourn Britney's life, which was taken far too soon. That day, I had tears of pain and joy. I wish she could have seen the amount of us that came together to honor you, sis. We love you so much. Just know you won't ever be forgotten." Now, all the leads up into this point of the investigation were primarily waiting games. It takes time for warrants to be put together, for records to be pulled and to cross-reference the information. Even the DNA that was taken from Britney and the used condom also takes time. One thing that had come back at this point was the phone number that was texting Britney's mom, Alicia, about her daughter. Unfortunately, this was a spoof number. It was not coming from Nevada, and it was somebody who was messing with the family, which is sickening. I've said that a lot in some of these cases where people just reach out to family and mess with them, and I don't know what kind of person gets like a kick out of that. Like, in my opinion, like, you're just as messed up as somebody who takes somebody's life. Like, ugh. Not to mention, when you do something like this, like, you take up so much time and resources that could have been productive in the investigation as opposed to not leading anywhere, because it's infuriating. The JT lead also didn't end up panning out. The one JT that Britney and Britney's friends were able to figure out was the same Britney, or the same JT that Britney was speaking to. He was in Alaska at the time of her disappearance. They did look into other possible JTs that maybe they didn't know about. It was a popular nickname. It actually ended up being quite a popular nickname. A few of them came up in the area. So then when they cross-referenced them to like green F-150 type vehicles, they came up with 2 JTs. They both happened to be ranch hands, which was common in the area. You'd have a lot of people just coming through town, looking for work, a place to stay. This could last like a couple days, a couple weeks, months, years. But both of these JT ranch hands were not in the area when Britney disappeared. So it's kind of feeling like this whole investigation is back at square one. And so the detectives go back to her family thinking, okay, well, is there anyone else that you know in her inner circle? And maybe it's not like a JT. So her mom did mention a a boy that she had been crushing on a couple months earlier. He definitely had the cowboy vibe. He had a nice car, but he had broken things off with Britney when she didn't really want to move like as physically fast as he wanted her to. But Britney had still remained pretty close with this guy's younger sister. And so one evening, while Britney and his sister were out driving around, they had gotten into a car accident when somebody was driving distracted and had rammed into Britney's car. This guy, who was upset that Britney had standards, took this accident as a opportunity to just like shit on her. He told Britney things like, "I wish you died in that accident. Go unalive yourself. You're a waste of space." And one night he told her, "I can't wait until they find you graped, and murdered in the desert." 3 months later, she's now dead with a condom near her body, signs of sexual assault. But he was also excluded when he was able to prove with video surveillance that he was at work the entire day that Britney had gone missing. At this point, surveillance ended up being really important in the case. They started to pour through footage of surveillance in the area, trying to find a green F-150 just headed in the direction of where her body was found and like by the school. Now, luckily for detectives, there was basically only one way to get to Burner Basin where Britney was found, and this was on Boyd Kennedy Road. There happened to be a gas station that had a camera pointed directly at that road, and it also happened to point exactly in the direction where the high school was. So they look frame by frame, don't miss anything, and they do not see any green F-150 pull in or out or around or past the school headed in the direction of Burner Basin down Boyd Kennedy Road. They do see a truck that they were told about the day their investigation started, though, and it's Britney's friend Bryce's blue Silverado. Expecting to see it, it wasn't much of a surprise, but what they're expecting to see is the truck pull into the high school like he said he did, and then pull out and leave and head home. But at no point did he pull into the high school. He just drives past the high school, headed in the direction of Burner Basin where Britney was found. This footage also wasn't picked up a few hours after she had left band practice with him. He had told investigators that they drove around for a few hours, but this was actually only 30 minutes after he picked up Britney from her dad's practice. So investigators request cell phone data on Bryce's phone, and they want to see if they can place him alongside Britney's GPS data that they got from her cell phone provider. Sure enough, they are able to track both phones together from the point of where he picked her up all the way to the exact location that her body was found. Now, they got this like behind the scenes through a search warrant from his cell provider. So Bryce has no idea. And they want to see how he's going to react when he is called to come in and just try to help with the case. So he comes in, and instead of asking for his cell phone to like analyze data and see what they can like pull at this station, they ask him right away to provide a DNA sample to eliminate him because they say they found DNA at the scene. And he agrees. Again, they have to wait for these types of results, which I'm sure is like so frustrating, even for an investigation. It's so frustrating, like for us listening. You're like, okay, like what's going on? But there's a process. There's time to the process. So they let him go while they wait for results, which ultimately comes back as a match to DNA that was taken from underneath Britney's fingernails, and it also matched DNA that was found on the condom at the scene, which also showed Britney's DNA on this condom as well. So their next step was to ask Bryce to come back in for another interview, which he did. And he's asked if the two of them had ever been intimate with one another. Come on, Sherrilyn, we're doing good today. And he says no, that he saw Britney just like a little sister. So the detective, just wants to make it crystal clear, okay, there should not be any of your DNA associated with her murder. And Bryce says, yeah, that's right, there shouldn't. So not knowing that it's the condom that they had DNA from, he's given that piece of information. Like, okay, well, there was a condom at the scene, and your DNA seems to match it. And Bryce says there's no way. And the detective says, you're right, Bryce. There is no way your DNA would be found inside of this condom, and Britney's DNA would be found on the outside of the condom unless it was used and touched both of you. So he switches up the narrative by saying, okay, Britney was really flirty with me that day, which she hadn't been ever before. And we kissed and she performed orally while I wore a condom. So when he's pressed to give more of the story and how she ended up unalived, his story keeps changing. He said that after they spent their time together, did what they did, she wanted to meet up with another guy. So this other guy went out and met them on Boyd Kennedy Road. He picked her up, but he actually never got a good look at him. And the detectives are like, okay, so you expect us to believe that there was some sort of sexual interaction with her. You dropped her off with somebody else, and then he brought her back to the exact location the condom you used was found, and then Britney was murdered at. But none of his DNA is at the scene or on her. And in fact, there's actually the wound to her neck. There was DNA of yours found on her neck. And he's like, well, yeah, I didn't kill her. So yes, I do expect you to believe that. And they clapped back, how I'm sure like if we were ever investigators would just like really love in that moment with like face the wall, hands behind your back, you're under arrest, bud. After Bryce's arrest on March 19th, 2020, the detectives also executed a search warrant for his residence and his vehicle, and they found a pair of bloody boots in his closet that further just linked him to the murder. They also found a knife, the alleged murder weapon, in the boot, and a bloodstained sweatshirt in his truck's toolbox. When her parents were told that there was an arrest that was made and they found the guy, I tried to put myself in that situation and just like imagine like the further punch to the gut when they found out this is not some new friend that she found, but the friend who not only Britney trusted, but they did too. It was 2 years after Britney's murder on May 9th, 2022 that Bryce Dickey goes to trial. And something that was really powerful was one of the people that took the stand was Bryce's ex-girlfriend. And she painted a different picture than some people who claimed to have known Bryce did, where he had been described as this, compassionate guy, the guy who gives you the shirt off his back, this shy cowboy who was always responsible, and why Britney's family, trusted him because he kept an eye out for her, always made sure that she came home on time. And his girlfriend painted a picture of a pretty aggressive guy. She said that during their relationship, he had choked her at least 4 times. And actually, one of the last times that he had choked her was the evening of Britney's vigil. The trial went on for 9 days, and the jury was able to see that the only person who had motive to harm Britney from keeping her from reporting the assault that had happened to her was Bryce. So they came back with a verdict after less than 4 hours of deliberating. Bryce Dickey was ultimately convicted and sentenced to life with parole after 20 years for the murder charge. He also received 20 years for each deadly weapon enhancement and life with possibility of parole after 10 years for the sexual assault, which ultimately brought his sentence to life with the possibility of parole after serving 70 years. He's currently incarcerated at Lovelock Correctional Center. And one of the most painful parts, I think, for her family is that they have never to this day been given a reason why. How do you do this to somebody who trusted you? Their family trusted you. Not only trusted you, with Britney's care while she was alive, but like even after the fact, like they believed his story. Alicia, Britney's mother, was actually able to confront Bryce at the trial. And she said, "I believed your ridiculous lies and your story about the green truck, and you let me come and comfort you, knowing you had raped and murdered my daughter. I hope the guilt eats you up inside and drives you to the complete chaos that my mind lives in." Even though he's never given a reason, it's believed that even though he had a long-term girlfriend, he wanted to be with Britney. Shortly before her death, her friend said that Bryce had professed his love to her. Britney had told him, you know, "I'm flattered, but I don't feel the same way," but really wanted to remain friends with him and, you know, made sure like, you know, "Don't worry, even though you said this, like, we're good." And she was under the impression that, you know, everything was fine. Unfortunately, there wasn't anything further than the truth. It very much seems that Bryce thought, okay, if he couldn't have Britney, then nobody could, which is just devastating. Now, I came across a Facebook page in honor of Britney, and her mom is very active on there. She shares many of her beautiful memories with her daughter, and she also encourages, you know, women to stay safe. It's so sad that you should have a guard up and be hesitant of, you know, going alone somewhere with people that you think are your friends. But she is really a big advocate for just making sure like you're on guard, you're hanging out with groups of 3 or more people to try and prevent something like what happened to Britney from ever happening to somebody else. So if this story has touched you, please go and send some love to her family and friends. I've come across quite a few of these types of memorial pages in the past where my supporters have gone to show their support to the loved ones of the victims that we talk about. And honestly, you guys have just like no idea how much it means to somebody knowing that their loved ones touching people's heart and that they're not going to be forgotten, and that yes, this mission and this goal of trying to prevent something like this from happening and it having some form of purpose in this, you know, madness is, you know, actually doing some good. So I'll have the link for that in the description. There's no one who sends love like Sippendale's supporter loves. So I'm sure her family and friends will really appreciate it. All right, you guys, that is it for me today. If you have not already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It means so much to me. You have no idea how much it helps me grow to be able to continue to do this. I know that it might sound like very repetitive, but like just that small act, it really goes a long way. So I appreciate you all so much. The answer to today's riddle is: first, think of the color of the clouds. Next, think of the color of snow. Now think of the color of a bright, full moon. Now answer quickly. What do cows drink? And the answer is water. Were you like me and said milk right away? Okay, I'm trusting you on this one. I want to know who said milk, who said water. All right, I will see you in the next video. I will miss you terribly. Until then, make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon.